After a disastrous offseason and season, the 76ers somehow still have a chance to compete, a chance to finally validate the Joel Embiid era, a chance to, against all odds, go from a 24-win team to a real chance at an NBA title. They gave Paul George a giant contract and he had his worst year in the NBA since his second season. They gave Joel Embiid a massive extension that they didn't need to give him, and then he was barely healthy enough to play a handful of games. But it doesn't matter. They have a real path towards being a threat next season, and frankly, they have a lot of different directions that they can go in moving forward. And the biggest reason for all of that is they got absolutely insane lottery luck. They are now picking at 3rd overall in the 2025 NBA draft, jumping a bunch of teams, and although they weren't as lucky as the Dallas Mavericks, who somehow with a 1.8% chance ended up with the 1st overall pick, they did end up with a franchise-changing asset at 3rd overall, which is especially crazy because they would have given their pick away to Oklahoma City if it fell 7th or later, and they were 5th in lottery odds. So if two teams jumped them like they did, they would have ended up at 7th and just given their pick away and not had the asset at all. But because they also jumped up into the top 4, they now have this giant lifeline for the rest of the Joel Embiid era. And of course, the first question is going to be, who are they going to pick with 3rd overall? There's plenty of rumors out there about them possibly trading this pick, which makes a lot of sense, and we're going to talk about that later. But there's two guys that are very clearly targets for the Philadelphia 76ers at 3rd overall. First and foremost is Ace Bailey. He's a shot-making wing out of Rutgers and someone that coming into the season, some people thought had a real chance at going 1st overall in this draft because in some people's estimation, he has elite shot-making skill. There's been some Kevin Durant comparisons, which is always dangerous, but you can see the offensive skill. If you just looked at the highlights for Ace Bailey, you might think, why is he not in consideration to go 1st overall? To me, it's obvious that it's going to be Cooper Flagg 1, Dylan Harper 2, regardless of who makes those selections, and then you get into the Ace Bailey kind of conversation at 3rd, and right now he's probably the favorite for the Sixers to select at 3rd overall. There's a couple of problems here though if you're Ace Bailey and the Sixers. One, it's going to take him some time to develop into whatever he's going to be at the NBA level. Definitely a more of an upside and more of a projection pick at this point, which if you're Philly, given your timeline around Embiid and potentially Paul George, that doesn't really work for you. Also, there's some of these like really high upside Kevin Durant comps for Ace Bailey. I find that really unlikely. I think his comp is more so in like the Michael Porter Jr. kind of range where he's just never really going to create off the dribble. He's never really going to get to the rim all that much, but he can definitely be a really, really good shot maker on the perimeter. He's going to hit some mid-range 2s. He's going to shoot pretty well from 3 on occasion, but not necessarily this like crazy high upside score that some people think that Ace Bailey could be. But that kind of player, Michael Porter Jr., if he gets there pretty quickly, is a really good fit within the Sixers team. It's just how quickly is he going to get there? The other guy that they could potentially target here is VJ Edgecombe, which falls a little bit more in the kind of role player category, higher floor category than this really high upside swing in Ace Bailey. VJ Edgecombe is an unbelievable athlete. He's shorter, he's like 6'4", 6'5", but you could see him as this really rugged defender, great athlete, someone that gets to the rim on occasion, and if he improves as a three-point shooter, could be a perfect high upside, high level role player kind of guy on the Sixers team. But again, how quickly is he going to get there? I actually think Edgecombe is a little bit more in play here for the 3rd overall pick than some people seem to think. But right now, it seems like those really are the two options for Philly. I think both these guys are really cool, really interesting long-term prospects, but for where Philly is at, it might not really work. Like, yes, Maxey McCain, whatever rookie wing you want to put in there, then Paul George and Joel Embiid, plus their bench is super interesting. They've got some vets that are free agents coming up, but generally they're pretty good at finding value on the edges of their roster. They've got Quentin Grimes, who's a restricted free agent, and it's a nice mix. That group is a nice mix between winning now and in the future, but it doesn't necessarily put enough of their pieces in one direction or the other, and you could find yourself just kind of stuck in the middle of, you get into a playoff series and Ace Bailey and VJ Edgecombe are just not ready to play, and maybe you finally get a season where your vets are healthy, but you just don't have a good enough roster. It's just kind of a weird in between if you keep the pick and select one of those guys. So of course the question is, and a lot of the rumors around the Sixers right now are, what if they trade the pick? Well, first and foremost, to make it worth it, if you're looking at how can we add a star to this Sixers team by trading the 3rd overall pick, which I think is going to be their first question, Paul George kind of has to be in the deal. If you look at the salaries on Philadelphia, you're keeping Tyrese Maxey, you're ideally keeping Jared McCain, and even then his contract isn't a whole lot to try and match salaries with, and of course you're keeping Joel Embiid, so Paul George has to be in the deal. But how do you find a team that wants Paul George even if you attach the 3rd overall pick to him? In a vacuum, trading the 3rd overall pick for a win now player makes a lot of sense for Philadelphia, but if you have to attach Paul George to the pick, it becomes more difficult. And it becomes more difficult just because of how terrible he was last year, and then of course the injuries. Like, it's not just, oh, Paul George had a little bit of a down year. He had a terrible season, a bunch of injury stuff, and his value is as low as it's been in a very, very long time. This is probably the lowest Paul George's value has ever been as an NBA player. So if you look around the league, you're like, okay, can we find a team that might want Paul George? What if they went to the Phoenix Suns and said, hey, we'll take Kevin Durant. We don't care if he signs an extension. We're okay with him just being here on a one-year deal. We'll trade you Paul George and the 3rd overall pick in exchange for Kevin Durant. That would be a pretty crazy trade for Phoenix because it gives them kind of like a, not necessarily a win now player because Paul George's value is so low, but like healthy Paul George alongside Devin Booker. Your team might not be that much different than it was this year, potentially better depending on how the injury luck works out. And you get this asset of the 3rd overall pick. You have Ace Bailey there or VJ Edgecombe or whoever you pick to help you in the long term as well. And if you're looking at Kevin Durant trades, the 3rd overall pick is probably as good of an asset individually as you're going to get in possible Durant trades, whereas the Sixers just get out of the Paul George thing. They don't have to worry about his long-term contract anymore. And then Durant in place of George is just better for their team. You've got Maxey, McCain, some vets, Kevin Durant, and Joel Embiid. Like, that's a really, really interesting team all of a sudden. I don't know that either team would say yes to that. I think Philly would be more likely to say yes because it gets them out of the Paul George contract. But then Phoenix probably isn't that excited about taking on the contract. And that 3rd overall pick, although it's enticing, doesn't really match up with what they've been trying to do over the last couple of seasons. But I do think it would be an interesting construction. Then you look around and you're like, okay, what other stars could possibly be available that would be on the value level of Paul George and the 3rd overall pick? What if you called the Pelicans and you're like, hey, you can have the 3rd overall pick in this draft. You're going to do a super reset because you've got other picks in this draft as well. Could we have Zion? Could we pair Zion with Joel Embiid in the front court? You get Paul George, or you can find a 3rd team that maybe wants Paul George. Again, that continues to be an issue. The hilarious part of this, obviously, is you're swapping out an injury risk in Paul George for a bigger injury risk in Zion, and you're pairing Zion and Joel Embiid in the front court together. Those guys might play 40 games combined next season. So obviously a big risk, but I show you those trades more so as an indicator of how difficult it could be for Philadelphia to actually find a real trade that gets them a good player in return using the 3rd overall pick, because they'll probably have to put Paul George in the deal as well. You have to look around the league and go, first and foremost, who wants Paul George? Can we talk to Cleveland about maybe trying to fix their wing rotation by adding Paul George in there? Is the Lakers a realistic option? Like, it gets really weird really quickly just because of how bad his season was last year. You also could go down the road of, what if we use the 3rd overall pick as a base for a Giannis trade? Well, again, you got to find a team for Paul George to go to, because the Bucks certainly don't want Paul George. Again, do you find a Lakers team or a Cavs team that would be interested in potentially having Paul George go to them as part of a 3-team deal? And then it just gets really weird and it gets really complicated. But that's going to be a conversation people are going to have. Again, just like I said with the Warriors video the other day, like, people are going to put Giannis in a Sixers uniform and put it in their thumbnail and hope that people click on it. And I think that it's just an unrealistic expectation, again, unless you can find a place for Paul George to go. This is by far the biggest issue with where the Sixers are. It's really cool that they got the 3rd overall pick. It's nice that they have so many good players, even though there's a bunch of injury questions. The biggest issue is getting actual value out of that, because we've seen this with teams in the past that have this high pick and then they want to trade it. Like, the Warriors really tried to trade the James Wiseman pick in 2020, but they couldn't find a team that would give them something that they really wanted in exchange for the 2nd overall pick. So, like, the Sixers could call the Nets and say, we want Cam Johnson. What can we kind of do to make this work? And they could do Cam Johnson and 2 of the Nets' later first-round picks at 26 and 27 in exchange for the 3rd overall pick. Then the Nets have 3, 8, and 19. The Sixers get extra first-round picks to either add some guys that they really like later on in the first round as role player options, or they can trade those picks for some role player options, some rotation pieces on their roster. Then you get Cam Johnson, who fits really well as a shooter. You get to keep Paul George in this scenario, which isn't necessarily a prize, but when you're looking at rounding out your lineup, you've got Maxey, McCain, Cam Johnson, Paul George, and Embiid, plus vets off the bench, plus Quentin Grimes if you bring him back, plus these 26, 27 overall picks. Then all of a sudden that gets kind of interesting. But again, those are really the 2 avenues here for Philadelphia. Is you're trying to find a Paul George team, or you're trading for someone like Cam Johnson with the 3rd overall pick, which just isn't ideal. However, there is one other option. It's unrealistic, but one that I find supremely interesting and immediately thought of when they ended up with the 3rd overall pick in this draft. Without context, if you just take away who the players are, what they mean to the city, the contracts, everything, just trading away Paul George and Joel Embiid this offseason and then focusing on the future is an interesting concept, because obviously you'd have to find teams that would be interested in those guys. The contracts are an issue. Let's just say theoretically, you could trade away Paul George and you could trade away Joel Embiid and you could get the equivalent of a first round pick for each of them. It's unrealistic, but let's just say that's the case. All of a sudden, you can add your future first round picks by trading away those guys. Your 2026 first round pick is top 4 protected, so you could actually keep that, and then the 2027 first is loaned out to like 100 different teams. But theoretically, you could trade away George and Embiid, you could build around Maxey McCain in the 3rd pick, you could risk it next year, try and land in the top 4, which given how the top 4 went this year, might not be the best idea of all time, but you could, and then all of a sudden, next year, you get a top 4 pick in what looks to be a pretty good draft. You've got Maxey, whoever the 3rd pick is, let's say is Ace Bailey and Jared McCain, and you're then moving towards the future with some of these extra first round picks you got in the George and Joel Embiid trades. All of a sudden, that looks kind of interesting. However, 1, it's unrealistic, and 2, just because it's an option doesn't mean it's something that the Sixers are going to do. And the number one motivator you have to keep in mind with the Sixers as they go throughout their offseason is 1, it's difficult to trade the 3rd overall pick as we've discussed, and related to that is Daryl Morey and Nick Nurse want to keep their jobs. These guys are at the point in their careers where Daryl Morey might not get to be a GM again. He might not get to run an NBA team again if he gets fired from Philly. And same thing with Nick Nurse. He might not get another head coaching opportunity if he gets fired from the Sixers. And a rookie does not help them do that, nor does trading away Joel Embiid and Paul George and focusing on the future. Unless they get absolute guarantees from ownership that it's okay to do that, they're not going to do that. So they're going to look at trading this pick. And I think my prediction, my expectation is we're going to hear a bunch more rumors over the next handful of weeks about how the Sixers are aggressively looking to add a veteran, add a player with this 3rd overall pick, because they just don't want to wait around for Ace Bailey, VJ Edgecombe to develop around the core that they have. However, it's going to be difficult. It's going to prove difficult to actually make that happen. And unless a Paul George team comes up, I think they're going to end up making this selection. They're going to try for weeks. They're going to do what the Warriors did in 2020, where they're going to shop that 2nd overall pick, in this case 3rd overall pick, for weeks. And then they're going to find out, okay, teams don't actually want to give us a real player that's going to help us in exchange for this. The value is better to just keep it. And then they're going to have Ace Bailey or VJ Edgecombe on the team, and it's going to be a constant rumor mill around those guys as they turn into whatever their team is going to be next season. All those things combined create an extremely interesting situation in Philadelphia that I cannot wait to see unfold, and it's all changed because of the insane lottery luck that they got.